All right. Here we go again.
Howdy. Yeah,
And
we
go ahead.
have a number of notes here left over, but run.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think at the end of the last one, we felt like we had kind of hit on most of the leftovers or places we wanted to dig more coming out of the Complexity Lounge meetup. It's not like we really are done, but it sort of feels like, well, now that we've done that, the machine is rolling and we have momentum and objects in motion stay in motion and there's no friction to slow us down. So we just keep going and we keep having little ideas and stickies and things that come up. So we're still here, guys, for all
Let's
three of you
just hit
watching.
record and see what happens.
So I'm looking at our stickies. And the one that I think will take almost no time at all, but I just thought maybe some folks might appreciate. This ties back to some of the other metaphors that we've talked about.
We love those.
I do love a metaphor. It's
We
problematic. You love a
I need it.
metaphor.
Yeah.
We all love metaphors in this world. But at some point when we were talking through some of the topics from the Complexity Lounge, I thought of the Lord of the Rings story about when they get to the Doors of Durin, which are, they're at the door to this mountain. They're trying to continue on their, I'll save. I mean, you either know it or you don't. But if you don't know it, basically the band of travelers arrives at a door that they need to get through to keep moving forward on their journey. And it has what is effectively a riddle written above the door that says, "Speak, friend, and you may enter." And so the group spends a little bit of time kind of like thinking about, what does this mean? Is there some like long lost language that we have to translate? Is there some kind of answer to something, and so like the story goes that they spend time kind of being flummoxed by and frustrated by this riddle and can't gain access. And then eventually someone figures out, actually just say the word friend in whatever language. And because the literal instruction isn't meant to be this crazy riddle. It is literally, speak, friend, the word friend, and you may enter. Whereas they were interpreting it as, speak, comma, friend, and you may enter. And the group gets in and goes on their merry way. And I've grossly simplified the story, but I just think there's so much about complexity, science, and the kind of work we've been talking about the last couple weeks here that is like that. I think there are a lot of people doing the equivalent of Frodo and Gandalf and the other hobbits kind of sitting and like kicking rocks and kind of being frustrated about like, how do I get in? How do I go forward on this interesting adventure? And thinking that there's some tougher riddle, and it really was as simple as say the word friend and you can come in. And so I just love the metaphor and all that it could imply for people in this world.
Yeah, this resonates in that everyone that I've not everyone, so many people that I've reached out to and said we should probably talk are not necessarily people that are showing the same frameworks, boasting about the same sort of thing, doing the exact same work. They're doing adjacent work. They're using similar language, but not exactly the same thing. And I'm pulling them aside and saying, let's swap some notes here. We have similar stories, and that's really the core of it. Is the story is not necessarily the in language and the who do you know and all that. Do we read the same books, that kind of stuff? Because I don't read many books, if any.
We've established you're not a reader.
Yeah, I'm not much of a
Let the world know. Kyle doesn't read.
Yeah, I'm announcing it so that nobody has expectations. But there's often this sort of fear of, yeah, I'm a Jason. I've got my own thing over here, but can I get over there? And I'm constantly encouraging, like, yes, you're already there. We'll make sense of this through the differences in our language and what we're actually exposed to. That's important. That's kind of core to all this. And I think in the first episode we were talking about that a bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I set up some of those attractors at Capital One, was just by trying to speak a little bit more plainly and finding that so many other people were having the same plain language and were able to connect to it. But before we drop all this and say, okay, we settled all that, everything's great there, there's the other side of this. And I encountered this a little bit last week, I think. And usually I jump past these when I see them on LinkedIn. And this is I think you know where I'm going, the Dunning-Kruger sort of I just found something about complexity. Now I'm ready to host a presentation, or I'm going to put together this big article about it. It kind of goes back to what we've been talking about, that Dionysian moment of, I stole wine, let's go get drunk on it.
Yeah.
I so have, I want to like embrace those folks. And I think I do to an extent, but also like, oh, I hope you don't influence a lot of people on this. There's the Dunning-Kruger drop off here is going to be sharp. You're going to find, I found it. The first thing I did was I ran back to a bunch of people and was like, let me regurgitate what I know. And then I got my legs cut out from underneath me. And I found myself in groups of people that were like, oh, it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
But they welcomed me in.
Yeah.
Was the important part. It wasn't a stop doing that response. It was you are just, you haven't even crossed the plane of the rabbit hole yet, but we're going to catch you midair and help you along the way.
It is tough because you do want, because we hear so much on both ends of the spectrum from people who are intimidated by and don't feel worthy, or definitely feel worthy, but then bring a sort of real defensiveness with them about their right to exist in certain spaces, I say, discourse, whatever. And then on the flip side, you get the folks doing kind of what you've described. And, sometimes I think it's just naivety. It's Dunning-Kruger, which hasn't that been debunked, by the way? I don't know. I have to go look up the latest on it. I hear back and forth. I've read back
I'm
and
always
forth. It doesn't matter.
curious.
We all know.
It,
We know
it
what
comes
it means.
up a yeah. Okay.
Yeah, even if it's not a thing, it's a thing in that we get, somebody.
Now it's a metaphor if it's not a thing.
Now it's a metaphor, if not actual.
Right, the cliff of Dunning-Kruger.
But I do, but there are also people who are operating less on the naivete and more on even sometimes not bad faith, but like they want to take this thing, they see its potential and its popularity, they want to quickly instrumentalize or weaponize or productize the thing for their own gain and profit, sell it to clients, whatever. And so I think it's really easy for all of those things to get swirled up in a mix, and people kind of struggle to figure out like where they are. Am I in danger of being someone who's like misusing this because I don't know enough about it? I'm afraid to engage. Or people who are like, oh my God, I've just learned about this thing that has unlocked so much cool understanding for me and I want to share it with the world. And then realizing, Christ, I don't know anything yet. Like, shut up, Jen, and learn some more. I think the most important thing there is to realize probably whatever you think you're doing the other thing. There's a level of, because I almost wanted to respond to you and say, I think more people are more likely to suffer from kind of one of those than the other. Like most people err one way or the other. And then I kind of had to check myself and say, no, I don't think so. Like, I think depending on who you are and your background, like it's going to be different. And so what it kind of boils down to is whatever you think is like the thing you're most likely to do, like either run with something further and faster than you really have the right to yet, or if you're the person who's too likely to be timid and afraid to engage in discourse that you have every right to, whichever of those you think, you're probably the opposite. Like there's a level of, I think maybe just the self-awareness and the self-reflection to kind of recognize it's a constant process of triangulating and figuring out where your own expertise is on this scale of knowledge building and practice and experience building. So I don't know. That's an interesting one, especially because we did talk about this earlier about the nature of like expertise a little bit too. And this is on our mind because of recent webinars and such. But I do think that is in and of itself, it's not unique to studying complexity, but for some reason it does seem like it's really sharpened by something like complexity, which is just so maybe post-disciplinary as a concept for people, that it invites a lot of different forms of expertise where you might be at the very expert end of a spectrum in one particular domain or discipline and kind of use that as your door to complexity, but then lose sight of the fact that you're not an expert in complexity science. Do your knees have to get cut off by that and you get told to slow down? No. Do you find a welcoming group that can like help you, realize where you live on that journey? Yeah. Man, I wish I had something smarter to say other than like, I think everybody probably just needs to think a little bit more about where they probably are in terms of how they react to new and exciting things, and recognize they probably have it the opposite of who they are. Because most of us we have good blind spots about that, about ourselves and all that.
And listening to you talk reminded me of a couple of conversations I've had recently with folks who have done exactly what I said. They found something, got excited, they threw a framework and an image up and made a
Yep.
big claim. But along with that claim came the this is what's on my mind right now. I'm not sure. It's not fully baked. I'd
Yeah.
love to turn this into a conversation.
Yeah.
And that led to me being able to engage with that and say, what about these things? And my probably first instinct might have been a little bit, I got to correct this. But
Hmm.
honestly, I want to learn from them too, because they're coming at this from a different angle. And so
Yeah.
I started asking interesting questions. I think that led to a bigger conversation. It led to jumping on a call and swirling a little bit and saying, we're going into a different direction. I don't know where we're going, but this intersection of where you're coming from and finding this and where I'm coming from in my experience and how I found this is creating something novel now or something we're unfamiliar with. And so let's not nail it down and name it necessarily, but let's continue the conversation.
You know, okay, I have two responses to this. You have to help
Uh-huh.
me hold both of these, okay? Because I'm gonna say the first one, but then actually do the second one. We'll come back to the first because I think it's more off topic. The first is,
Good.
are you an external processor? Because
Yeah.
you do
Oh,
a
all
lot of
day.
talking about
All
I
day.
talk to people. So let's come back to that though, okay? So that's hold
All
that on.
day. External thinker. Yep.
Yeah. I'm not. I think some people would be surprised to know that I'm not.
I'm surprised to hear that.
So because I'm not processing live most of the time when we talk. I mean, I am,
Mm.
but not in the way that I think you're doing it. So we'll talk about that. But the other
Mm-hmm.
thing I did
Okay.
want to say was I think on the topic of people who do discover or grab onto some new learning, especially around systems and complexity lately, I like to think that I have a lot of patience for and will extend people quite a bit of grace in those early phases of the learning journey, whatever that is. And that's important. But there is a point after which if someone is not demonstrating a good faith interest in continuing to learn and continuing to take in the information, the knowledge, the experience of others that can continue to correct. And we're all on a journey of, pattern fitting or whatever, correcting what you know. I kind of feel like there is a point after which if somebody has made it clear that I read a book about complexity. I'm selling this to my clients. I'm now establishing myself an expert on LinkedIn. I'm posting images and frameworks that I've had AI help me create. I'm taking all of this stuff and like grossly flattening it, creating this like 2D projection of this beautiful like 80 dimension thing, blah, blah, blah. And those folks, and I'm not going to name names, but those folks
Mm-hmm.
drive me insane. But you don't see me out there trawling in their comment sections or anything because it's just not my style and I don't really care to. And I also don't operate from a position where there's real need for me to do that, nor like who cares what I have to say in a lot of those cases, right? Like I don't know that person personally. There's not really a relationship or a reason to invest. If what they were doing had more of a direct impact on my ability to do the work I wanted to do, I would care. It does for certain other people. And so I see those people engage. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's for good reason. So to that end, though, how do you decide how much grace to extend someone on their journey of learning about, and this doesn't just apply to complexity, but it's again so relevant. I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule to that. I wonder, because I hear you often talking about, yes, I will reach out or we'll chat, we'll blah, 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 we'll scroll for a bit. It's great. Like I find all of that to be really useful, and I love engaging with folks with whom I even majorly disagree on things or feel
Mm-hmm.
like we have radically different understandings of something. But there is a point after which, if you're not demonstrating that good faith investment in what is evidence based or what is true to the spirit of something, a discipline, domain. And I don't mean that in the sense that some like vaunted group of like old white men have decided this counts and this doesn't, but I just mean there is like a community based sort of emergence of what is known and what is yet to be determined. And if you are ignoring all of that for your own profit or your own advancement or your own personal
Mm-hmm.
brand, after a point, they don't want to know you, and good riddance to you. And I kind of feel like I don't know where that line ever is. It's like you know it when you see it, but I'm curious if you have that experience or if it's different from you or for you.
I find that I approach those folks, but those are the ones that don't respond.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's usually a good
I
tell.
Exactly. Hey, this is interesting what you're talking about. And usually the reason that I approach them sort of offline is because they haven't created the invite to say, let's talk about this publicly, which then I'm looking at that and I'm saying, this is probably somebody that has their brands, their livelihood staked in this sort of thing, and just tearing them to shreds. I'm just as much of a dick as any, I'm the aggressor in that scenario.
I've
And that
never
doesn't need to
seen you in
happen.
that mode. I don't believe it.
No. And I'm not interested in that either. It's not about tearing things to shreds. I would like to have more of a conversation,
I
and I
don't
can
know
poke
if
a
you're
lot of holes in
capable
it.
of tearing someone to shreds, Kyle, and I'm going to call you out on it and challenge you to tear someone to shreds publicly so I can see it, because I don't believe it until I see it. Actually, some other
Uh,
time, not today. We should swap stories of sharing
okay.
people to shreds.
There's an old version of Kyle that could have done that sort of
It's
thing,
funny.
but a
There's an
more
old version
mature,
of
older
Jen.
version.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it.
You
Not
probably
because
argued
I
on the internet with the best of
know the
them.
arcs happen. Sure,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, so I I think I'm not sensitive to the line so much as I'm sensitive to. Well, let's be totally honest here. We'll sidebar in some of these events and talks and pull our hair out for a moment.
Oh yeah.
You know, figuratively, but like let our fast brain sort of have a deep sigh through a lot of that. But
Yeah.
by the end of that conversation, we're usually going like, all right, so I understand why this might have happened this way or where this comes from. And it's interesting to examine how
Yeah.
people are coming to this and
Yeah.
what they're presenting and whatever. So
Yeah.
it's not all I'm not like purely like in 100% generous mode all the time. I've got snap judgments on a lot of
Yeah.
these, but the nice thing about some of those encounters is I can step away from it for a few minutes and come back and make an
Yeah.
offer of let's talk more, because
Yeah.
I am honestly curious why people do some
Yeah.
of those things.
I think it's the
I have
curiosity.
assumptions.
Mhm.
This person just wants to make a few bucks on this and it looks like an opportunity.
Yeah.
That might prove to be right, but I haven't
Yeah.
met that person yet. I've never had that conversation. People that are like, I don't really give a shit about what this does for people or whether or not I'm inclined to progress it in any way. I just see that I can sell a product and I'm
Yeah.
ready to go. I've never met that person despite having a few of those biases.
Yeah. You know, though, as like you're talking about this, it kind of it raises for me this question of, well, because what I hear in what you and I share on this is that neither of us seems very interested in like coming to a conclusion about somebody and whether they belong or don't belong in a discourse, in a discipline, in an activity.
Mm-hmm.
I think you and I are probably both more on the, like, speaking of Myers-Briggs from last time, the P and not the J, you know, however
Right.
you want to go with it. I
Yeah.
think that's probably like a fair assessment. Most people could probably tell. But I do think that I am also a big believer in, I don't know how else to put it, but like the system's going to take care of it. So
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't need to be the cop. I don't, if something somebody's doing is a problem, unless it's harmful, like we're getting into weird kind of zones here, but if it's a problem in the sense that like that guy's not qualified to be doing that, that guy's radically misrepresenting this idea, like, fine, let some people hire them, let some people learn from them. They're all going to learn garbage. They're going to, like, you know, eventually there will be a consequence or a result that will either then change someone's understanding or their behavior, or it won't. That's how a system learns. There's an encounter with a difference, there's a reframing
Mm-hmm.
that happens, there's an integration of something, for better or for worse. Like, you know, it ain't for me to worry about it. And unless I say, again, it's directly impacting my ability to do good work for other people, or, you know, there's some kind of harm. But it does bring up that notion that like we do put scaffolds or straight up rules in place in society. Like, we don't let people ride bikes on the highway. I don't know why, but as you were describing this, and I'm thinking about all the problematic ways you can talk about expertise and who has a right to engage in certain
Right.
types of things. Uh, we don't let people ride bikes on the highway. Why don't we let people ride bikes on the highway? Right? And who decides? And what happens if someone does? And who is it to protect? And
Right.
I don't plan to, like, you know, plumb the depths of that metaphor here. I just leave it in the open-ended ether for people to think about in the nature of intellectual activity and the furthering of certain knowledge practices why don't we let people ride bicycles on the highway, and who is doing the deciding and to what end, and how does that maybe relate to things like systems practices, complexity science, and other, even like AI and a lot of other things that you would consider emerging or bleeding edge of blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add any or say anything to that, or if you want to switch to the process.
I'm not going to jump into the bikes on the highway. That's perfect the way that was. Instead, I'm going to Bluey, and
okay. Yep.
there will be more Bluey coming out, because I think this is brilliantly
I'm surprised
written.
You haven't snuck Bluey in before now. I know you're a fan.
Here it is. I'm a huge fan. So I have 2 toddlers, and we have been watching that since day one together. And there's this great, all the episodes are like, what, 9 minutes or so, I think, at the most. They're all short.
2 episodes of Bluey, Kyle. I don't know. I watched the one.
Excellent. Well, that is an excellent start. So yeah, there's the 130-minute. Maybe I sent you that, but everything else is about 9 minutes. Anyway, there's an episode of, they're all drawing cartoons, and so it is a cartoon of a cartoon. It's all on like lined paper with crayon.
Yep.
And the kids are drawing like you would expect a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old to draw, with crayons, and it looks great. And there's mom and dad there too, and Bandit and Chili. Bandit, he draws almost like a 6-year-old too. And Chili is really well refined. She knows how to draw. And there's a story in there somewhere about, and remember, this is animators that make this show, so there's got to be something in there. But the different stories between Bandit and Chili and how they came to drawing it all. And Chili talks about how she would like to draw horses. And she would draw a horse, and she didn't like it, didn't look very good, but her mother would come in and say, it's not good yet. Keep going. Like, I love that you're doing this. I love how the horse is taking shape and constantly pushing it. And then on the other side, you had Bandit saying, one day I drew a car I was really proud of, and I stood up in front of class and I showed it to somebody in the class. Bully embarrassed me in front of everybody, and I put the paper down and I put the crayons down, and that was the end of it. And now here they are, decades later, and still drawing like that 6-year-old drawing the. And so I love that like this. These are the kinds of episodes they put together. It's not a conclusion necessarily, but it is the intersections.
Yeah.
And I think about that often when I'm running into folks that are somewhere in that arc of I know, I don't know, which is always modulating for me. There are times that I'm like, let's do this conversation. Let's get public out there. And other times when I'm like, shit, I don't even want to put something in the chat in a conversation in this group, because I am feeling like I don't have anything to contribute to this. I'm not here with everyone. I'm not on this level. They're going to pull it apart in some direction. Again, it's never happened. But it's, when I say arc, I mean a modulating arc. That was a lot.
No, it's not a lot. I thought it was like very, very. I'm just thinking about the various 80 things that has kind of brought up for me, and which one to like pluck out of the cloud above my head. I mean, I think that especially that we contain multitudes, right? Every one of us, engages in all of these different faceted ways, and we all occupy a different identity at different times in different contexts, and we move seamlessly from one to the next without always being aware of it. And so, and I don't even think the right thing to do is to become more aware of it. That's not even the implication. But I think that just knowing that to be the case, and knowing that we also get to play a role in someone else's experience of what you're describing. Yeah. So there's a level of that, like I said a little bit ago, and maybe I'll amend or add, I do believe there is a level of it's going to just work itself out one way or another. If a person is interested enough for the right reasons, they will find their way to a style of engaging that is like mutually beneficial. And if they're not, then they don't, and it won't work that way, or things will work it out. I don't believe it in like a sort of platitude, like, it'll all work out kind of thing. But I do think that systems are self-correcting to some extent in that way. And I think at the same time, I'm a huge personal freedom person. We'll put it that way. save
Hmm.
deeper conversations till later. But 'cause
Hmm.
I know we've got a few teed up on those topics. But there's a certain point where I also think, even if I really vehemently have a problem with or disagree with the way that someone is engaging, or if somebody else is doing something that impacts how somebody else engages, I will err on the side of hands off. Unless, again, there's certainly a threshold over which I'll intervene for values and ethics reasons, but avoiding those topics around like abuse and harm. If we're just talking about how somebody interacts with somebody on LinkedIn, or if somebody's monetizing something that is, creating a more or less welcome space for others, it's going to work itself out, because there's some level of humans interacting with each other that'll work through it. And if you can simply be more aware of whether you, in the Bluey story, are the bully who made it so that somebody stops engaging with something, versus the person who is like, cool, keep going. Like, it'll keep getting, well, it may not even keep getting better. It'll just keep going. It'll keep
Right.
being, and I try to be the latter, of course. And I think most of
Yeah.
us want to in our work. So
And well, we're trying not to draw the like good bad sort of distinction of these things. It's more structure and relationship. So I will, so many of these conversations, even we kick off, but so many ways that I relate to other people are in that even the people that are out there trying to monetize this thing will sit down and say, have you heard of
yeah,
this? Because they've been driving that. And that's an opportunity to say, yes, familiar with it. Here's where I converge and diverge. And this is where it breaks down for me. This is what I do like. And here's what I do differently. But all of that is an opportunity that's created even by somebody that I would look at and say, I think you're doing it wrong. It still is an enabler for so many other conversations to have that dialogue, even if I can't have it with them directly.
yeah.
That creates new opportunities with these new relationships.
You definitely have a bigger appetite for that than I do. I think I engage in that a lot, but I come from a different, like, this comes back to the external processing piece of it. I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of it.
And
And
why I don't
actually, we
read
should we should share
part
for
of
the 3 viewers or whoever was watching. One of the things we put on our stickies on our mural board is like, do Jen and Kyle need to disagree some more, because we are very different and have some very different views on things,
Yeah.
but I don't feel like we have actually explored those for people yet. And I think it would be beneficial for you guys to hear some of our contrasts, but we'll come back to that. But this may be a place
Mm-hmm.
where that's true.
Very much so.
Yeah, not in the spirit of it, because I also am like, yeah, let's talk. Like, when people reach
Right.
out to me on LinkedIn, 9 times out of 10, I'm like, yes, let's talk. And I've never had
Mm-hmm.
an inch of like reservation messaging random people I've never met, being like, hey, can I get 20 minutes so we can just shoot the shit? Because like, this is interesting and what you're doing is interesting. Da, da, da. So like, that we share. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably a certain point where I'm like, yeah, I'm not scouting. I don't mean scouting in the actual like verb, the way people are using it, but I just mean like, I'm not out there as much. I kind of feel like okay, probably this is a good place where I should have processed this more first. We have talked about this particular metaphor around ourselves and how we engage with people, being the attractor or whatever, being a
Mm-hmm.
magnet versus a trap. But I think I am a slightly more stationary magnet. And I see you being almost a little bit more like a magnet on the end of a stick. It's a
Yeah.
terrible metaphor. Terrible.
Nope. I like
You're the
that.
magnet on the end of the
Yeah.
stick. I'm the magnet that's just like stuck in the ground. Maybe better even there would be, I try to think about, and this is, I don't know how to do this without like, who's got a physics degree? There's a magnet, but there's the magnetic field, and you
Mm-hmm.
can put something in a magnetic field. And if it is itself either magnetic or responds to magnetic fields, it will. So like, I am always thinking about, what is the like field, the relational field, the magnetic field. We can talk about the sociological relational field stuff, whatever, but what is the field around me that I can kind of modulate in a way that if somebody enters this field and there's meaningfulness there, they will work their way to me and find me, and we will together have the way that two magnets interact, or two atoms or two electrons or whatever, by virtue of this field making it possible. And I say this not in a way that I want to like, there's no judgment or like a better worse, but like, I hear what you describe so much more as almost, again, you're kind of out there sweeping and seeing what you pick up with the magnet on the stick
Yeah.
versus me
Yeah.
here generating a magnetic field and seeing what gets sucked into the orbit, of this massive body. So there's some metaphors for you. Sorry, guys.
That's
But
I've
do you
go ahead.
disagree? Tell me if you agree or disagree. Does this
Maybe a little bit, only in that I wouldn't call you stuck
Okay, that's
because
fair. I
you
don't feel that way either.
it's not good. Yeah, and it's that despite I think that that difference is probably right. You have the ability to sit down and I'm going to reread this book for the third time because it's amazing. I'm going to process it and then I'm going to like have my own position in it and then have some conversations with some folks. But and I am more like I'm going to find snippets of these things, put them on post-it notes all over the place, or keep this sort of torrent in my head for a bit, and then I'm going to go talk to people and help process all of that. However, we sort of land in the same space of you still have we're able to create all these metaphors from all these sort of multicultural positions of fit a lot of different roles and identities and groups and that sort of stuff. So able to relate this in interesting ways. So I might be on that stick. I might extend and like do all the stage diving to find my way through this. But that means you've got a very big accretion zone that is still collecting a whole lot of other stuff.
I would accept that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It almost, now I'm imagining like classic like metaphor in like physics education when you teach people about space-time continuum and you talk about it being like a bed sheet, and you put like a marble deforms the sheet a little bit, a big bowling ball deforms the sheet a lot more. That's kind of a good metaphor for the gravitational field as well as time, whatever, but you get the idea. And I feel like to some extent, maybe I operate more like one of those larger objects. Again, not stuck, still moving. Yeah. And you're kind of more the marble that's like rolling around and seeing, which marble madness. Okay, everybody, we've got it. Marble madness.
That's it. Yeah. And this is why I can't often read is I will read a couple lines of something or I'll read a couple pages maybe. And then I find myself just word scanning and I flip 3 or 4 pages and I haven't absorbed a thing because I'm thinking about 6 other things that this is reminding me of, or it's connecting the dots for me on something else.
It's funny you say that because I feel the exact same way when I read. I just keep reading.
Interesting. So when I do the word scanning, that's when I'm like, I just flipped 3 pages. I'm not going to go back and reread those, but I didn't absorb anything.
If I'm tired, I know that experience well. If I'm tired or if I'm distracted and I'll get 4 pages down, I'm like, I don't remember anything I just read. Then I'm like, it's time to put the book down, which is actually one of the reasons, unlike a few people I know, and my husband and I talk about this a lot, because he's someone who, he loves to read as well. He probably reads even more than me, mostly fiction. I'm the opposite. But and we actually discovered kind of weirdly over the last couple of years, I think we're both reading about the same things. He's reading about them in the form of speculative and weird fiction and horror and things. And I'm reading about complexity science. So there's a little, like I think a lot of the fiction authors that he likes are exploring the exact same theme. So it's interesting. We kind of realized one day, like, wait a minute, this book I'm reading about this thing that is nonfiction, and this book you're reading about a story of, fiction story are like about the same thing. What? Nonetheless, he can sit down and read for like a 5-minute chunk and be happy. I know I won't even start reading. I won't even open up the Kobo or the Kindle or the book or whatever it is, unless I've got like at least a half hour, because I have to kind of lock in so that I won't do what you've just described. But I am absolutely, thinking 80 different things when I read any given idea. I will like do that thing where I like pause and put my book down and just like stare into space for a minute. And Brian will be like, are you okay? Or did you just read something good? And I'm like, both, leave me alone. And then like there's that experience. But, again, how much of that's also just preferences and how our brains are wired. And I didn't read it all for many, many years. Grad school killed me on reading. So it was only in the last several that I started again. But I think this is interesting and it ties in. So the external processing question, I definitely am an internal processor. It's not like I'm afraid. I actually enjoy doing the external processing with others, but I kind of just naturally could probably live alone for my entire life and still have the same, like internal intellectual like journey and adventures that I've been on. Like it would not change a lot for me in a sad hermit kind of way. I'd be fine. But I do find I seem to attract external processors to me in friendships. I have a very good friend of mine who, we kind of had this epiphany at one point that like she works through things out loud And I would never have thought about this until it touched me one time when she kind of told me, she's like, you're one of the only people that it's actually safe for me to have thoughts that haven't been figured out yet, and I can share them and start blah 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 at you in a way that I know is safe because I haven't figured out how I feel yet. But by echolocating my own thoughts and feelings, and I'm not just there to like listen like a therapist. I mean, I'm talking to her, I'm responding to her, I'm sharing what I see.
Right.
It's not like I feel like I'm being talked at. It's a very
Hmm.
balanced relationship. And that was kind of one of the first times I went like, huh, she and I are so different. I don't do that, but we work in that yin yang way. So
Hmm.
there's probably
I
some of that
feel that.
here too. But see, when we talk, I don't
Yeah.
know. We'll have to see. Again, if you're one of our 5 viewers, let us know. I don't hear this as like an imbalanced external internal. I think we are exploring a lot of things that we've both already processed, whether externally or internally.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah. This is why I try to find as many groups as possible, because I
Mhm.
find the people that want those groups or end up taking the time to jump into those groups and those conversations are the ones that are bringing in. There are a few preachers in those groups, without a
Yeah.
doubt, and they
Yeah.
just want people to cure them. But that's few and far between. It's usually a lot of people that are coming in with a bit of humility and saying, "I found a thing and I don't know what to do with it, but maybe if I air it out here,
Yeah.
we can sort through it a little bit." And I'll, that's a lot of what I'm doing. And
You
yeah,
know,
like I have that same friend who we sit on the back porch and pour scotch and talk politics. And he's a black man, very different experience growing up than me. And we have this great relationship of being able to be vulnerable and ignorant, kind of exploring our pasts and our differences and what that means in the current context of things.
mhm.
And it's allowed me to explore things that I wouldn't be able to explore in a more public space or with other peers in a way. Like this is porch talk, and here we're
Yeah.
talking about like white privilege. And that,
Mhm.
I'll confess, when that first came up, I was like, I
Yeah.
don't I don't get it. I don't think this doesn't make sense
What's
to me anymore.
privilege?
But yeah, exactly.
Privilege.
Yeah, I earned all of this. I did all this is all me. And not
No.
that to that extent, but
No,
like
I know.
is this productive? Should we have this conversation at all?
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
through good conversations with him that I was
Yeah.
able to realize, like, oh, these are where that's a thing that I've taken for granted that I would have never put my finger on
Mm.
without that conversation. And it's those things that I take for granted that I am grateful for, that
Yeah.
I see other people are saying, nope, that's not even a thing I even knew was possible.
Yeah.
That's when I'd started to have the aha. But it needed
Yeah.
that space to allow for that. I couldn't have read that in a book anywhere.
It's definitely making me think a little bit about the nature of like, so having somebody or multiple spaces where you feel safe to be vulnerable, or safe
Hmm.
spaces for, like, I always talk about dangerous thinking. I see it feels dangerous to admit something, or it feels dangerous to explore this other perspective that is so opposite of my own and threatens my identity or whatever. So safe spaces for vulnerability, safe spaces to just be unfinished.
Hmm.
But when people create those safe spaces for you and then you get practice, then you feel more comfortable being that way in some of the not safe spaces or less safe spaces. I hear you describing that, and I feel like I have that experience as well, which is like, again, comes back to questions I get a lot about, how come you are comfortable entering these academic or theoretical or intimidating spaces where you're an outlier or whatever, and like you seem comfortable, you seem confident, and I think it might be partly the same, where if you have enough experiences of people in your life that make you feel safe to be unfinished
Hmm.
or vulnerable, then you actually can start to be that way in places where no one's actually going out of their way to make you feel safe. You just can be, because I don't know, that's an interesting thing that I've
And
not thought a whole lot about, but I think it's true for sure.
yeah, and you're reminding me of the stuff that Dave Snowden was doing with George Mason on conflict resolution,
Yep.
and Kyle Eggers and a few other people in
Hmm.
that orbit there that was had done a ton of work on this, where we don't get together and say, hey, you're different. Let's go have that porch talk on the and have some drinks and explore what that difference is. Nobody wants to be put under a microscope like that.
Yeah.
I don't understand you. Can you explain yourself to me and bury yourself? That's, but like my friend Aaron and I, we didn't meet that way. We worked together and we found we liked a lot of the same music, and we found all of the similarities. And over time, the sort of nuance and differences really started to pop up. And one of those similarities, one of those cross interests, was we wanted to figure out what that was. We both wanted to interrogate that to an extent. And so this is, now we're going almost like into facilitation and this sort of stuff now, but like this is where like I don't like the idea of bringing people together to say, let's fight it out. Again, old Kyle, 10 years ago, I was like, we're going to put our get along shirts on and we're going to have some courteous conflict. Is what I like to say. It's going to be like, it's going to be like Costco on a Saturday morning. Everyone's got to go their way, but we got to work it out somehow. We'll just feel it out. I still kind of like that Costco thing a little bit. If you know Costco, right. It's a massive traffic jam of shopping carts. But I'm less inclined to do that now and more inclined to find, why would anybody put in the effort to come to this conversation in the first place? Let's hone in on that. And then see what broadens from there. Here we go.
Okay.
Good. I like that response.
Yeah, good. We're fine. So actually, we probably are more, whatever. What I'm reacting to is what I know from knowing you to actually be very much the way I also think about facilitating almost anything. But I get itchy at the notion of choosing to emphasize or to anchor to commonalities. I think you have to do that, and I don't think it's an or. But I do think, and maybe I'm just on this lately because I put that piece out about stasis theory and disagreement literacy, but I do think, like if we were talking 6 months later, I might not even react. It might just be because I'm wired that way right now. But I do think that like it is a dangerous, maybe, well, slippery, I guess, slope to be on, to not also be pretty much at all times trying to create healthy space for some level of disagreement or conflict. And beyond just, things like nonviolent communication and knowing how to communicate, radical candor, or whatever you want to call your stuff, like I think there's a level of being at risk of flattening or dissolving some of the very, very, very meaningful and important differences that exist in the like topology of, human collaboration. I think that risk is very real when folks say they want to do what you've just described. Now, I know you well enough to know that that doesn't happen with you, right? But this is why I'm reacting more to the language, because I think part of really important, like healthy process for collaboration, for innovation, et cetera, is it isn't let's get in the room and hash it out together like adults, but it's also not let's anchor to our common goals. It's kind of a little of both and a little of neither. And it's let's find some ways to actually understand where we are in agreement and where we aren't. That's where I do find those rhetorical stases so valuable. But that's one of many ways to talk about granularity, talk about whatever. And I think that was why I reacted the way I did. So I wish there was more disagreement here. Maybe there is, but this you're right that this kind of starts to get into facilitation, which we also have as a topic to talk about, because the nature of what people call complex facilitation, or has been coined as the kind of facilitation you do when you know about complexity science versus the kind that you do if you don't. And I don't necessarily buy that, but anyway, I'm just going to shut up for a second because I can tell there's probably thoughts coming.
The thing you reminded me of is, and this is probably my, again, a more ignorant version of me that thought that that let's get together over courteous conflict. That courteous component requires a bit of grace. And this might be one of those privilege sort of
Yes.
angles of being able to just like expect grace
Yes.
and deliver
Yeah.
grace. And this is where I am always keyed into the trauma informed folks of like, not everyone has that bank
Exactly.
account to pull from, and
Yep.
having that expectation is not there. So, but that grace, that bank account fills up by finding each other, by connecting and humanizing each other. And you're not just an idea that is threatening across the table.
Of
You're a
course.
person that I would go hang out with on the weekend. You're a person that could
Yeah.
easily be my neighbor. That changes the amount of grace available. And so
Yeah.
that sort of those first exercises in some of those workshops, when they're a little closer to like, how are you arriving today, and like what's compelling you to be
Yeah.
here, is a great place to start building that. So when someone says, I think we just need to like, you know, send all this off to a third party, and the people that are going to get fired if that happens tomorrow aren't immediately like, well, that's just because you want. I'm going to personalize that. That's an attack on me. Instead, it's and we just had a really great conversation about where we're all headed, and now I have to accept that that might be within the range of where we're going, or on the
Yeah.
horizon somewhere. But I can't take that personally. I find that happens a lot.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is actually here, I think too, we might also be, okay, the right words is they're eluding me, but being someone for whom it's safe to be with somebody that I don't agree with, to me, doesn't necessarily always have to imply, because I basically agree a bazillion% with everything you just said, especially about the nature of engaging in these spaces and what people can and what privilege they have or what they have available to them as far as receiving, offering grace, and also seeing common anything. But for me, I don't think it's always true that you even have to necessarily find a common anything or experience a common anything or to even feel like we would like to hang out with each other in any capacity ever. I think you can, by virtue of being a human being, exist in a way that makes it clear to another human that as long as we acknowledge each other's human beingness, that's actually all you need. Like, that's the minimum viable connector. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe that in my fucking heart. Okay. And I
Yep.
say this because I think there are still times where people want there to be something just a little more. The exercises you're talking about, the how are you arriving today, or the ways by which we might find, and I'm not talking about commonalities like these superficial things, like we're all Bruins fans, so we can connect on that. Like, no,
Right.
but I think you can achieve what you're talking about here without even having to necessarily engage in a deliberate exercise or activity or any kind of movement if the process you're engaged in simply brings you into a space where you can just be humans with each other and make it okay that you aren't going to be expected to have any other common wavelength or common ground. And this is one of the reasons why I always talk about that phrase about being a safe space for dangerous thinking, because I have found myself in conversations, whether in work or even in other settings. I sit next to someone on the plane wearing a MAGA hat, or I am, engaging with people through my various adventures.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, we get to talking. And it's funny because, like we've said, I'm kind of an introvert and I don't usually strike up the conversation. But what I am doing is not listening to headphones. I am engaging with the world, and someone makes eye contact with me and they go, we're talking. And I'm like, okay, why the hell not? This could be fun. And then I'm in this deep conversation with somebody with whom I have nothing, no shared values, like they say things that normally I would be like, oh my God. But yet I keep going and I keep listening, and I'm not trying or even like attending to, well, we both want good things for, our friends. Like, of course we both
Mm-hmm.
want that. Like, these very basic things to me, I don't know. This is the shittiest I've ever done at describing a way I feel, because I have not really actually had to think through this in this level and articulate it then to follow. This is an internal process, not yet external process.
We're
But I
sense
think
making here.
what I want to kind of get at is I find it really intriguing that I do not consider it even relevant to the facilitative process that we must have some kind of shared anything. And the reason I don't feel that way is because I do feel and have seen it in action that you can be really successful in your collaboration and you can see people acknowledge each other's humanity and everybody's egalitarian sort of like existence without having to actively work through that stuff. And I don't know if this gets into like way bigger philosophical, kind of conversations, but at least in the work of facilitating people in groups to achieve certain ends where you've got so many nice little constraints and boxes you can draw around things because we're talking about work, and we're talking about delivering on a goal or something, there's already so many other kind of pieces of scaffolding that make this a little bit of a more contained conversation. But I just, at the end of the day, think you can get there without having to actually drive any kind of commonality, because by virtue of being humans in a room, if the person doing the facilitating knows what they're doing and have designed the substrate in which the interactions are going to happen, you can get that.
I agree. However,
okay, good.
However, there's a however. I think, like I was saying before, we sidebar and get frustrated. Our first response to things, bothersome. This is, but then there's time where we really start to pick it apart and kind of not necessarily. I understand that like all that's fine now; it's permissible, but I've got a different level of understanding. I'll call it slow brain, fast brain stuff. There's two things come to mind. The first is when bringing people together, there's some attractor there. And so there's a subtext of we have something in common just by that alone. And it doesn't take very much for me to pour a little bit of gasoline on that to really stoke that. It's not like, let's have some perfunctory ice-breaking activity where we talk about our favorite foods and someone goes, you like pizza too? That never happens. Nobody ever finds the catharsis in a icebreaker activity.
Dogs and ice cream. We all like them. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Dogs and ice cream. So now we've got nothing to argue about anymore. Let's move about our very way where we're going to now have to cut off people's livelihood and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we're good now. Grace established. So it's not a big event to make that sort of thing happen, but it is a realization that does exist. However, I was listening to this conversation on Ezra Klein's podcast with I'm going to forget Taneshi. I don't remember his last name, and I am now going to kick myself because it was such a great episode. But they got into this great disagreement, and where I think it's relevant here is about whether or not you find ideas reprehensible versus people reprehensible. And can you distinguish that? My favorite question, can you separate the art from the artists? And to what extent? At what distance? Can you still listen to Michael Jackson? And this gets sticky, right? And so this is where I think I agree with you. I'm one of those people that I don't believe people are, their beliefs may be abhorrent, but them as a being is not. And so I can find connection there.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for everyone.
Correct.
It is because, and maybe that's a position of privilege to an extent. I don't know. But regardless, some people can't afford to extend that grace to say it's your ideas, it's not you. So I'm more talking about investing in that space for that realization, for that slow brain to kick in. Not actually, there's no structure of that. There's no way that you can put two of those people together and say,
we're not talking
you
about
will now get along. The true get along shirt does not exist.
And this is one of the reasons I don't do icebreakers. I don't
Same.
do those exercises. I don't do
I do
anything.
them as parlor
I know
tricks,
you do.
the
I know you do.
subversive kind of stuff. I like that, but
Yeah,
not as a like let's all gather around pizza and
I
dogs.
don't. There's like a handful of things I might do that probably fall in that category for very specific reasons in certain contexts. But I kind of don't fuck with that stuff because for all the reasons we just said. And I think that you want to cut to the chase and make it safe for people to be disagreeing on the real stuff, on the meaty stuff. And to your point about, I think probably we're saying the same thing, create the container in which you can do that. And I'm not asking someone to give someone else grace that they don't feel like they can give it to. And I'm not asking someone to find some level of shared anything with somebody that they don't want to. And nor am I asking somebody else who probably should extend somebody some grace to figure out how to do a thing that they haven't built up those skills, or they haven't worked through their trauma, or they haven't figured out their own personal hangups about whatever. And I'm not getting paid enough to walk them through that in that setting. So there's like, but I think that the container you create is to give people enough of an understanding that we are locked in a roller coaster car or on a Disney ride, or we're locked into something on some rails by virtue of the setting we're in. And somebody does have a sort of like a finger on an emergency button, even if we really don't. But there's some level of this can all stop in a second if it needs to. Therefore, you can engage, and we're going to put some things in place, expectations usually more than rules, in a way that prime people to know that let's just get right into the heart of stuff where we are fundamentally misaligned or we disagree, and actually realize through wading through the disagreement, we can continue disagreeing. We don't even have to converge on something, but what we can converge on is not how we feel about a thing or what we think we should do, but rather what the literal next step is going to be. And that builds a lot of that safety in a weirdly counterintuitive way. I think a lot of folks get hung up on trying to create a safe space in which stuff can happen. And maybe what I'm trying to articulate is that you don't create safe spaces in which people come together to do things.
Yep.
People come together and the safe space emerges.
Yeah.
And, our role as facilitators is simply to encourage or scaffold the interactions in a way that can unfold. And you can't guarantee it because of all the things we know from complexity science, but we do know how to make the more desirable ones more likely to emerge, and how to quickly, on the scale of minutes, amplify the ones we want to see more of and dampen the ones we don't.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the one place where I will allow someone who wants to coin a certain form of facilitation as different than another form, complex facilitation. But I just think that's such a weird phrase, because this is all I've ever known of facilitation. And I know I've talked about this before, and it might just be because my facilitative chops were built in a learning environment, in the classroom, managing 30 unruly teenagers 7-8 periods a row in a day, which is very different than probably what a lot of people hear when they go to complexity or facilitation training and they learn how to be the expert facilitator who is more of an MC, and that I get. So, I won't even call it a blind spot, but I do have like a sort of a gap in my understanding of what is this other form of facilitation that we're supposed to be contrasting what we do with. But yeah.
There's two methods that I really like. One I learned from Michael Cheveldave and working with him, the sort of establishing groupthink first. It's not 100% groupthink is sort of the misnomer of that. Because again, you put four people with similar experiences together, sharing stories, the nuance of those stories will reveal themselves. And so it's not a true this, but there's enough validation in there that people then, I don't know if I want to say safe space, but they then come out with that sort of investment in that validation behind them to say, yes, this is what we're representing. The other is, this is why I like warm data. It finds that, we keep saying it finds the substrate. It does. It's that connectivity is there when you're swapping those stories, or here's what comes up for me. It's that
Yeah.
intersubjective, not accidental exactly. We're really shining the light on the fact that this is intersubjective, that we are exploring the different ways that we're
Yeah.
approaching this and what's coming up for us,
Yeah.
and then allowing that weaving to sort of take place. So I think both of those are powerful, but that all starts with the how do we find that connectedness first? The Laura Bateson quote, "We'll never find community until we learn how to commune first." That's, I think, so unbelievably core.
Yeah. I think I actually find it interesting too that I think Nora and at least maybe other proponents and folks, trained in warm data, and Kyle and I both know quite a lot about it. There's an interesting distinction I also hear people make to say this is not just like your run-of-the-mill other dialogic methods. Because it's really easy to kind of just hear or read a description of like a warm data lab or, people need people session and just say, well, isn't this kind of like Bohmian dialogue? Isn't this like other dialogic methods? And, people are kind of quick to be like, no, here's why it's different. But I actually think, what's the harm in saying, yes, they're related? Like, what if,
Right.
So there's that. So the reason I bring this up is because we're getting into our like semantic nerd jargon zone here. But I think that the dialogic sort of angle that we're talking about here is worth contrasting with a dialectic approach, which if you think about a dialogic, there are plural, we are engaging, we are intermixing, we are seeing what these different polarizing lenses do to the thing we're looking at. Versus dialectic, usually the way that folks like to use it implies that we are, yes, dialoguing, but we are also doing it in the service of trying to arrive at a central truth. That's an oversimplification. Do not come for me, friends. But I think there's a meaningful distinction between the two. And I think that they both have roles to play. In fact, I would almost say that a lot of the facilitation work I do actually intentionally uses both in certain ways. But I think that the former, the dialogic, is a lot more aligned with most of what we talk about here and what a lot of our peers and friends in the complexity informed community are really after. And I don't know, I just think there's something meaningful about that. I also find it interesting to think about facilitation as a practice because it's so much like teaching. And I've said this a million times, probably even here before, that most good teachers, are sort of trained to think less about teaching and more about facilitating learning, right? And where does that, you want to talk about human-centered design, right? Well, do the Ngram Google viewer for human-centered as a term, and then do it for student-centered and see which one came up first and how much earlier, okay? So student-centered learning as opposed to teacher-centered learning, way bigger, way, way earlier. Just to throw a little shade. And to that end, that doesn't mean all teachers are great or think this way. Don't get me wrong. But I think that there's a reason that a lot of the methods that have really grown up and are now on fire in our world, again, thinking about warm data, thinking about other dialogic methods, thinking about the notion of putting people in like groups, grouping like with like, which is so counter to what you hear a lot of design practitioners want to do. Right. We need diverse groups. Yeah, right. You'll get there. Trust me.
Right.
But doing those things, you walk into any American middle school or high school classroom, and this is what they're already doing and have been doing. And these ideas have been spread around by practitioners who are apprenticing with each other and mentoring each other in these natural learning journeys. I just find it delicious and somewhat ironic, but not in a way that I want to be like, told you so, we've been doing it all along. Like, it's not quite, I know I come off that way, but I just find, if my experience coming out of an education world was that I was doing things like this and I didn't have names for them. Some activities have names. Like I've talked about jigsaw a lot, which is kind of what we've talked about, where people are in a group doing something together. Then at some other point, you'll actually mix up the groups and justified, adjusted for adults in different settings. Or, for example, the fishbowl conversation or the World Cafe, these kind of variations on some of the liberating structures kind of, activities and ideas and such, which I know we want to talk more about later too.
Mm-hmm.
I just think about all of this and I think my prior to design, prior to complexity kind of world involved a lot of these that either didn't have names at all or have names that are very different. Now that I'm in the world I'm in, I can see some of those origins. And I think to myself, that's just me. And that's just my one disciplinary kind of path. Every single other person who finds themselves in this world coming from some other tradition, social work, psychology, library and information science, architecture, I don't care where you're coming from, music, sound production.
I was going to say, yeah,
there's something in your tradition, in your practice that you're going to go, hey, that's this other thing I used to do over here. I just called it something totally different. And I would very much like to see more about that in our world and in our work. Maybe this is partly why you and I are doing this, as like some small little way of trying to kind of open doors for that. So I know we've taken a tangent off of the facilitative, the methods but I think that's one of the things that always bubbles up when we talk about this is just this nature of who cares if it's called X or this is Y or, and I think there's an important evidence base for certain things we do. We want our stuff to be rigorous. I don't mean literally who cares, but there is a level of, I don't care if it gets called complex facilitation. I don't care if people see a warm data host certification on my LinkedIn. I care enough that I study the things, so I have them, but I don't care if the language and the naming is right. And I find that it is just a tricky thing because without the language, then how do we know which friend to speak over the, doors of Durin? Like, right?
You just reminded me of, I've seen thousands of resumes. I've been part of a few startup parts of business, organizations where we had to do mass hiring and that kind of stuff. And there's only one that really I remember to a T, maybe not to a T, but there's one that I really remember. And it was somebody that they were looking for a low-level manager, like an almost entry-level manager, supervisor type of role. Without any real experience in that space. However, they made a really compelling, wonderful case about the fact that they lead a World of Warcraft guild and what they do as a leader in that space. And I thought that was incredibly bold and resourceful and aware to say, nobody's paying me for this. I'm not tacking it on to my other job at wherever I was before. But this is a role that I still exhibit in my day-to-day life. And I can see the correlation. I can build on that to continue with that. I think that's
I like it.
Underrated.
There's two things about that that are really important. One is that they do that. They have that role. They occupy that identity. They are exhibiting the skills or the capabilities or the passion or the interest that are relevant for this other job.
Yeah, I'm learning through it.
Two, they have the self-awareness to understand and identify that, and then the ability to communicate it and to translate it. That is where I see so many people struggle, because I used to get, not as much anymore, but I used to get a lot of questions from folks who would be in like a career transition, and they would know that I went from teaching to design and whatever, and they'd want to be like, how do you connect the dot? I'm sure, it's the same. Like, how do you connect the dots? How did you convince design organizations that your teaching background was relevant? And I said, well, it's a very personal and very context dependent thing. And so you have to figure it out yourself and find the language to translate, in this case, World of Warcraft, like managing a community, to this job that you were hiring for. And like, you have to. So to me, I hear that and I go, wow, A, awesome experience. B, good on that person for being able to connect the dots in a way that you saw the connection. And I think that is the skill. It's this meta in between connective tissue translation is like, we should just title this podcast Translation.
Well, this circles back perfectly to how you kicked off with the Door of Durin, where every one of those people that I've talked to have done the same thing. You made the career shifts from process engineering and music production and film production into this. How? Why? How did you correlate
How
those
did you
things?
do that?
And most of the time I say, sit in on a few sessions and learn the language.
Mm-hmm.
Gaining the in language, as much as we hate that as designers, as we imagine that we're above that, we are so unbelievably guilty of identifying you're one of us by the words you drop, the names you drop, all that kind of stuff. And once you can get a hold of that language and relate it back to yourself, staring at the door saying, I can't figure this out, you just have to know how to say the word friend in the dwarven language, and the door opens.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the translation.
Yeah. That's probably a really good place to stop, because I got to run anyway. So
it's like a perfect place to stop. Right back where we started. Door of
yes,
Durin.
I love a good circle.
Yeah.
I love a good ring.